The rise and fall of King Nebuchadnezzar, the golden age of Babylon, in the dusty plains of ancient Mesopotamia. One name would echo through history like thunder: Nebuchadnezzar II. This wasn't just another king. This was the man who built an empire that made the ancient world tremble. Born around 630 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was the son of Nabopolassar, the founder of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. From childhood, he was groomed for greatness, trained in warfare, politics, and the art of conquest. But nobody could have predicted just how far he would go. The warrior prince, young Nebuchadnezzar, first proved himself on the battlefield. In 605 BC, while still crowned prince, he led Babylonian forces against the Egyptian army at the Battle of Carchemish. This wasn't just a victory, it was a massacre. The Egyptian forces were crushed so completely that their military power in the region was broken forever. But fate had other plans. In the midst of his triumph, news arrived that changed everything. His father had died. Nebuchadnezzar raced across the desert, covering hundreds of miles in record time to claim his throne. The warrior prince had become king. The conqueror as king, Nebuchadnezzar unleashed a military machine unlike anything the world had seen. City after city fell before his armies. His strategy was brutal but effective: surround, starve, and conquer. Resistance was met with overwhelming force. His most famous conquest came in 597 BC, when he set his sights on Jerusalem. The city of David, the jewel of Judah, stood defiant. Nebuchadnezzar laid siege, and after months of suffering, Jerusalem surrendered. He took King Jehoiachin captive, along with thousands of Judah's elite priests, nobles, craftsmen, and warriors. The treasures of Solomon's temple were stripped and carried back to Babylon, but Jerusalem's suffering wasn't over. A decade later, when the city rebelled again, Nebuchadnezzar returned with fury. In 586 BC, after a siege that brought unimaginable horror and starvation, his armies breached the walls. This time, there would be no mercy. Solomon's temple, the sacred heart of Judaism, was burned to the ground. The city was demolished. The people were led away in chains to Babylon in what became known as the Babylonian captivity. The master builder, but Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just a destroyer. He was perhaps history's greatest builder. With the wealth of conquered nations flowing into his treasury, he transformed Babylon into the most magnificent city the world had ever seen. The city's walls were so thick that chariots could race along the top. According to ancient historians, they stretched for miles, creating an impregnable fortress. 8 massive gates controlled entry, but none compared to the Ishtar Gate masterpiece of blue-glazed bricks adorned with golden lions, dragons, and bulls that seemed to leap from the walls. The processional way led through the city, its walls decorated with 120 lions in glazed brick. Priests and kings would walk this sacred path during religious festivals while crowds gathered in awe. But Nebuchadnezzar's crowning achievement was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Legend says he built them for his wife Amytis, who missed the green mountains of her homeland. Imagine terraced gardens rising high into the sky with trees, flowers, and fountains creating an artificial mountain of green in the middle of the desert. Water was lifted from the Euphrates River through an ingenious system of pumps and channels. It was engineering genius combined with romantic devotion. The king also rebuilt the great ziggurat Etemenanke, the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. This massive stepped tower inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. It rose nearly 300 feet into the sky, a stairway connecting earth to the heavens. The height of power at his peak, Nebuchadnezzar ruled the largest empire since the Assyrians. From the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from Egypt to the mountains of Persia, his word was law. Tribute poured in from subject nations. Babylon's markets overflowed with silk from the east, spices from Arabia, and gold from conquered lands. The king lived in unimaginable luxury. His palace was filled with the treasures of nations. He dined on the finest foods while musicians played. Armies of servants attended his every need. He had achieved what every conqueror dreams of: absolute power. But pride was growing in his heart like a poisonous seed. The dream that changed everything, according to the biblical book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that terrified him. He saw an enormous tree that reached to the sky, visible to the ends of the earth. It provided shelter and food for all creatures. But then a voice from heaven commanded that the tree be cut down, its branches stripped, leaving only a stump bound with iron and bronze. His wise men couldn't interpret it, but Daniel, one of the Jewish captives, could. The tree was Nebuchadnezzar himself. The dream was a warning. The king would lose his throne and his mind, living like a wild animal until he acknowledged that heaven rules over human kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar was shaken, but ultimately dismissed the warning. After all, who could bring down the king of Babylon? The fatal moment 1 year later, the king was walking on the roof of his royal palace. The entire city of Babylon spread before him like a jewel. The walls, the temples, the gardens, the palaces, all his creation. In that moment, pride consumed him completely. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? He declared. The words had barely left his lips when judgment fell. The fall, what happened next, has puzzled historians and theologians for centuries. According to Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar was immediately struck with madness. His reason left him. The mighty king was driven from his palace, away from human society. He lived in the fields like an animal, eating grass like cattle. His hair grew long and matted like eagle's feathers. His nails became like birds' claws. The ruler of the world had become less than the lowest beggar. Some scholars believe he suffered from a rare psychological condition called bonethropy, where a person believes they are a cow or ox. Others think it was a divine punishment exactly as described. Whatever the medical explanation, the transformation was complete and horrifying. For 7 periods, likely 7 years, the great Nebuchadnezzar was lost to madness, while regents ruled in his place. The man who had destroyed cities now couldn't recognize his own reflection. The builder of wonders couldn't construct a simple shelter. The King of Kings lived like a beast. The restoration, but the story doesn't end in the field. After 7 years, according to Daniel's account, Nebuchadnezzar looked up to heaven. In that moment of surrender, his sanity returned. Reason flooded back into his mind. He stood up, a man again. But he wasn't the same man who had fallen. The king who returned to his throne was humble, broken, and transformed. He issued a proclamation acknowledging the God of heaven, admitting that his kingdom was only a gift, not something he had seized by his own power alone. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, he declared, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. The conqueror had been conquered. The builder had been broken down and rebuilt. The man who thought himself a god had learned he was only human. The legacy Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 43 years in total, dying around 562 BC after his death. The empire quickly declined. His successors lacked his ability, and within 23 years, Babylon fell to the Persians under Cyrus the Great. The mighty empire crumbled like dust, but Nebuchadnezzar's story lived on. His name appears throughout the Bible as both villain and, ultimately, as an example of redemption. The ruins of his Babylon still exist in modern-day Iraq, where archaeologists continue to uncover the magnificence he created. The Ishtar Gate stands reconstructed in a Berlin museum, its blue-glazed bricks still gleaming after 2,600 years. The lesson Nebuchadnezzar's story is about more than ancient history. It's about the danger of unchecked power and unlimited pride. Here was a man who had everything: power, wealth, fame, and achievement. He had literally built wonders. Yet all of it was nearly destroyed by the belief that he alone was responsible for his success. His fall teaches us that no matter how high we climb, no matter how much we achieve, humility remains essential. Pride doesn't just go before a fall. Pride is the fall. The moment we believe we're untouchable, we've already lost. But his restoration offers hope. Even the worst fall doesn't have to be final. Nebuchadnezzar lost everything: his throne, his mind, his dignity, but when he finally humbled himself, he found restoration, not just of his kingdom, but of his humanity. The man behind the myth in the end, who was Nebuchadnezzar, a ruthless conqueror who destroyed Jerusalem and enslaved nations, a visionary builder who created wonders, a madman who ate grass in the fields, a humble servant who finally acknowledged powers greater than himself. He was all of these evils, human, capable of tremendous achievement and terrible cruelty, of soaring pride and genuine humility. His story reminds us that the distance between the throne and the field is shorter than we think, and the path back requires only the willingness to look up and acknowledge our limitations. The ruins of Babylon still whisper his name across the desert winds, but the real monument to Nebuchadnezzar isn't made of brick and stone. It's the story itself, a timeless tale of ambition, pride, judgment, and ultimately, redemption. From the battlefield to the palace, from the heights of glory to the depths of madness, And finally, to a humbled wisdom, this was the journey of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who learned that true greatness requires humility, and that all earthly kingdoms eventually fade, but some lessons last forever.